My name is Nancy, and I met John shortly after I graduated from college. His charisma and drive really enchanted me. I had no idea that we were married and residing in the flat he had purchased prior to our nuptials. Although it wasn't particularly fancy, I cherished every moment of it since it was ours. Soon after, we had a daughter, Sarah, who was ideal. My curly hair and John's blue eyes. We had a loving family, a comfortable house, and bright futures, so I felt like we had it all. I was hired as a secretary for a small but expanding business. Despite the low compensation, I liked my job and got along with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was advancing in his construction company. Big projects and even greater deals were the stories he would bring home. Despite the fact that his long hours meant I was frequently alone with Sarah, I was proud of him. But as time went on, John's personality altered. With suspiciously narrowed eyes, he had arrived home late. He demanded to know who called. Why were you all dressed up? I dismissed it with a joke at first, but his envy quickly grew oppressive. One evening, I confronted him after he had interrogated me over a work-related matter. Are you accusing me of cheating? John, who is it with? The postal worker. He didn't grin at all. Nancy, stop acting foolish. That employer of yours is happily married and has 3 children, and I can understand how men view you. I interrupted. John, for crying out loud. Your wife is me. I adore you. My words, however, were ignored. Our marriage deteriorated as the disagreements increased in frequency. I had been and would continue to be faithful. John's anguish, however, permeated every aspect of our life like a poison. Sarah, blissfully ignorant, stayed that way. When she was 10, school, friends, and her iPad were her entire world. I made an effort to protect her from our arguments, but children are usually more astute than we are. I didn't miss the irony that John was the one who was often on business trips and always arrived home late. I was the only one who had cause to be skeptical. However, I had faith in him. I thought our vows and our love were real. How come he couldn't do the same? I couldn't sleep one night after a particularly violent fight, so I just stared at the ceiling. I felt so far away from John, even though his gentle snores filled the room. How did we end up here? When had trust given way to distrust and love to suspicion? I considered leaving, taking Sarah, and beginning over. However, where would we go? How could I provide her with a life on the pay of a secretary? And even so, I still had affection for John. The man I thought he could be again was the one I loved. The rock I had always relied on, my mother, had a stroke, just when I thought life couldn't get any more complex. It came as a shock and left us all reeling. Mom had been the epitome of well-being herself. She had poured herself into book groups and gardening when Dad passed away, trying to make the most of her existence. She was able to live in this lovely home in the upscale area of town because to Dad's life insurance and wise investments. It was that Tuesday morning that altered everything, even though I used to joke that she was enjoying the life of a retired movie star. The call came in during work. Mom was unable to talk or move her left side. Heart in mouth, I hurried to the hospital. The weeks that followed were a haze of medical facilities, physicians, and terrifying medical terminology. I visited every prestigious facility in the region in the hopes that someone would reassure me that Mom would be well, but the prognosis was not good. Due to the stroke, she was bedridden and required 24-hour care. I was overpowered. How could I handle my career, care for Mom, take care of Sarah, and simultaneously cope with John's jealousy? Slow motion drowning was how it felt. And then John suddenly had an idea. One evening during supper, Dad suggested that we move into your mother's home. My spaghetti almost suffocated me. What? Think about it, Nancy, he said, his eyes burning brightly. It's a wonderful home in an amazing community. Sarah would have a room of her own, maybe a playroom. You would be immediately there when your mother needed care. We may also earn some additional money by renting out this property. I had to concede that it was logical. We didn't have to commute to take care of Mom, and her house was much better than our flat. Nevertheless, it felt strange. I don't know, John. I paused. It's Mom's home. We can't just show up. He was adamant. I'm sure she would like the company. You mean it's preferable to a nursing home? There was something to that. Her mother had been quite clear that she did not want to wind up in what she called a glorified jail for the elderly. Perhaps this will work. The next day, I brought up the topic with Mom. The thought made her face light up, which surprised me. "Oh, Nancy," she said, her voice tremulous yet eager. "That would be wonderful. This historic house needs to be revitalized." The decision to move into Mom's house was made in an instant. I kept thinking that this was the start of something major as I began packing up our flat. Simply put, I had no idea if it was anything positive or negative. John was ecstatic about the transfer. He continued to discuss the man cave he had made up in the basement and the garden he planned to grow. Sarah seems thrilled to have a larger room as well. The move to Mom's house brought a whole new set of challenges. I quickly realized that taking care of a stroke patient was a full-time job, one I wasn't equipped to handle alone. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I hired a nurse to help out during the day. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She came in every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, taking care of Mom's basic needs. But evenings and nights were all on me. I'd come home from work exhausted, only to start my second shift as Mom's caretaker. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and often silent. I'd change her diaper, giving her as much dignity as I could in the process. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the meds, and finally dinner. It was grueling work, both physically and emotionally. Seeing my vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state broke my heart every day. But I did it because I loved her, because she'd have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11, I thought she'd be old enough to understand, to help. Even boy, was I wrong. One evening, as I was heading to Mom's room, I saw Sarah dart past, her hand clamped firmly over her nose. "Sarah," I called out. "Where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma?" She shook her head violently. "No way, it smells gross in there." I was shocked. "Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now." "I don't care," she spat back. "She's disgusting. I'm not going near her." Before I could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned and hurt. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John for support, but found none. Not my problem, he'd say whenever I asked for help with Mom. I didn't sign up for this. It stung, but I couldn't entirely blame him. He hadn't signed up for this. None of us had. Still, I couldn't help but feel resentful as I watched him play video games with Sarah or take her out for ice cream while I was elbow deep in adult diapers and medication schedules. The one silver lining was seeing how close John and Sarah had become. They'd always had a good relationship, but now it seemed stronger than ever. I'd hear them laughing together in the living room or see them huddled over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It warmed my heart, even as it made me feel more isolated. 2 years flew by in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still needed constant care. I was exhausted, but I'd found a rhythm. Then one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was changing Mom's sheets. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. "Nancy, dear," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit, with company of young women, different ones, always very pretty." I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. That night, I confronted John. "Oh, those are just potential tenants," he said smoothly. "I'm showing them the apartment." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But doubt had taken root, and it grew like a weed. A week later, I found the lipstick stain. It was on the collar of his white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hand shook as I held it up to the light, trying to convince myself it was just a pen mark or a food stain, but I knew better. I waited until his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I even opened the door. There was John in our bed with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "Nancy," Joan exclaimed, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the scene before me, feeling my world crumble around me. "Look," John said, his voice cold. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but let's be honest, Nancy. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mother. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and left, my mind already racing towards what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way, but in the end, we stood before a judge dividing up our life together like it was nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. Then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. At 12, she was old enough to have a say, and her choice broke my heart. "I want to live with Dad," she declared, her voice steady. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing, and Mom's always trying to make me help." The judge nodded sympathetically. He took into account John's higher income, the stability he could provide, and Sarah's clear preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to focus on what was best for Sarah. John could give her opportunities I couldn't: private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me. A schedule that looked so neat and tidy on paper, but felt like a gaping wound in my heart. As I watched Sarah pack up her things, chatting excitedly about her new room at Dad's new place, I felt like I was losing everything. My marriage was over, my daughter was leaving, and I was left with a house that felt more like a hospital than a home. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, have ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then slowly, things began to change. Sarah started canceling plans. "I have a sleepover," she'd say, or "Dad's taking me to a concert." I tried to be understanding, to be the cool mom who didn't make a fuss, but each cancellation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail, and text messages were met with one-word responses, if I got any response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice informed me that the number I was trying to reach had blocked my calls. My hand shook as I dialed John's number. "What do you want, Nancy?" His voice was cold, annoyed. John, I can't reach Sarah. She's blocked my number. What's going on? There was a long pause. Then he said, Look, Nancy, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that. Respect that? She's my daughter. She's also a person with her own feelings, John shot back. And right now, she doesn't want to be around all that negativity at your place. I mean the sickness, the sadness. Sarah needs stability. She needs a normal family. Sarah sees Lisa as a mother figure now. She has a normal family life here. 2 parents, no sick relatives, no drama. Why can't you just let her be happy? I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was glad John couldn't see me. Look, he continued, his voice softening slightly. I know this is hard, but if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force it. It'll only push her away more. I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my rights as a mother. But a small, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I pushed too hard, I might lose Sarah forever. I sank to the floor, phone clutched to my chest, and sobbed. My little girl, my Sarah, didn't want me anymore. Someone else was being her mother, kissing her good night, helping with homework, sharing all the moments I was missing. Mom found me there hours later, still on the floor. She'd managed to shuffle over with her walker, her face creased with concern. Nancy, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. What's wrong, sweetheart? I looked up at her, this woman who'd been my rock for so long, who I'd been taking care of for years. In that moment, our roles reversed again. I was the child seeking comfort from my mother. Oh, Mom, I cried, reaching for her hand. I've lost her. I've lost my baby girl. Mom squeezed my hand, her touch still weak, but full of love. No, Nancy, you haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. She'll find her way back to you. You'll see. 14 years. It's amazing how time can fly by and drag on simultaneously. Mom's condition improved slightly over the years. She regained some mobility and speech, but caring for her remained a full-time job. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I felt a mixture of grief and shameful relief. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this big empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment, no more schedules of medications and therapy sessions, just me rattling around in rooms full of memories. Then out of the blue, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice I'd know anywhere, even after all these years. Mom, it's Sarah. I was hoping we could meet to talk. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. As I waited, my hand shaking around my coffee cup, I spotted a young woman entering. It took me a moment to realize it was Sarah. Gone was the gangly preteen I remembered. In her place stood a poised, beautiful young woman. Hi, Mom, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We made awkward small talk at first. She filled me in on her life, her job in marketing, her hobbies, her friends. Then she dropped the bombshell. I'm getting married, she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. Here's an invitation. My heart swelled with joy and a tinge of sadness. My little girl getting married, and I'd missed so much. Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you. Listen, if you need any help with the expenses. She cut me off abruptly. Actually, Mom, that's kind of why I wanted to meet. I was hoping to talk about Grandma's inheritance, the house, her savings. I want them. I felt like I'd been slapped. Excuse me. Look, Mom, she said, leaning forward. That house is in a great area. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there, start our family there. Anger bubbled up inside me. Sarah, you haven't set foot in that house in over a decade. You said it disgusted you. You called it a tomb. She waved her hand dismissively. I was a kid then. I've grown up, times have changed, and let's face it, I'm Grandma's only grandchild. She would have wanted me to have it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Want you to have it, Sarah. You didn't even come to her funeral. You didn't call, didn't write for years. That's ancient history, she snapped. The point is that house should be mine. I deserve a comfortable life. Deserve. I was practically shaking with rage. You didn't lift a finger to help when Grandma was sick. I gave up my life to care for her, and now you think you deserve her house. Sarah's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, I'll sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine. She stood up abruptly, snatching the wedding invitation from the table. You know what? Forget it. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there, and I don't need your permission to take what's mine. As she stormed out of the cafe, I sat there stunned. The daughter I'd loved, missed, and longed for all these years was gone. In her place was this stranger, cold and greedy. The days following that disastrous cafe meeting passed in a haze. I alternated between rage, grief, and a numbing emptiness. But as the dust settled, I realized something surprising. I felt relieved. The weight of hoping for reconciliation, of longing for a relationship with Sarah, had lifted. In its place was a strange sort of peace. I didn't attend Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift or a card. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned pets who needed care. It felt fitting somehow. Curiosity got the better of me a few days later, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media. There she was, radiant in white, smiling up at her new husband. For a moment, my heart clenched with the pain of what might have been. But then I saw it. A long, rambling post about her cruel mother who refused to attend her wedding and who withheld her rightful inheritance out of spite. I read it twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. Part of me wanted to comment, to set the record straight. But what would be the point? The people who mattered, the family who had seen me care for Mom all those years, knew the truth. As for everyone else, well, their opinions based on a stranger's social media post were hardly my concern. A week later, my cousin Jenny called. "Nancy, I thought you should know," she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Sarah's been talking about suing you for your mom's estate." I sighed, unsurprised. Let her try. "That's just it," Jenny continued. Apparently, she talked to a lawyer. He told her she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Your mom left everything to you, clear as day. I couldn't help but chuckle. Of course, Mom had taken care of that. She'd always been the practical one. "Thanks for letting me know, Jenny," I said, "but honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She's made her choices." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm proud of you, Nancy. After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace." As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house. Mom's house, now my house. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe here. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved so much. It had gotten a bit overgrown in recent years, but I could see its potential. Maybe it was time to bring some life back to it. As I stood there planning my next trip to the garden center, I realized something. The chapter of my life revolving around Sarah, the hope, the pain, the longing, was finally closing. But that didn't mean my story was over. Far from it. When the call arrived, the garden was in full flower. I had devoted the last few months to its rehabilitation, taking comfort in the straightforward act of fostering life. The aroma of the roses Mom had loved so much was filling the air as they began to open. My phone buzzed, unknown number, in my pocket as I was trimming the shrubs. Something compelled me to push the green button even though I nearly didn't respond. "Hello, Mom." Sarah's tears filled her voice. "Mom, I need your help." Pruning shears still in hand, I froze. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I'm pregnant," she said, "and we're having a hard time. I need money, Mom. I need your assistance. Your grandchild cannot be left without anything." I listened in silence as she continued to babble, her words growing increasingly desperate and accusing. "You left me behind, Mom. You never made an effort to get in touch with me. You never stood up for me. And now you're going to desert your grandson as well." I felt a calm, unwavering resolution snap within of me instead of rage. "Sarah," I spoke steadily, "that's enough." She stopped talking, presumably surprised that I had interrupted her. "I never left you. I consistently sent child support each month. You banned my number even though I texted, phoned, and emailed. Your stepmother was your choice. I appreciated the choices you made, even if they were heartbreaking. But Mom—" "No, I'm not done, Sarah. Now that you are an adult, you will soon become a parent. You need to take ownership of your life and your decisions. Your bank is not me. Lies and guilt trips won't influence me, and I'm not your safety net." On the other end of the telephone, I could hear her breathing heavily. "Go to your father and stepmother for assistance if you need it. Remember, they're your true family, the ones you selected. I have come to terms with that. You must now accept the repercussions of your decisions." "You can't do this." Sarah sobbed. "I'm your daughter." "Yes, you are," I responded, lowering my voice a little. "And I'll always love the little girl you were, but I don't know the woman you've become, and I don't think I want to." I inhaled deeply. "Sarah, goodbye. I hope all is well with you and your child, but please don't get in touch with me ever again." Before she could answer, I hung up, lowering the phone with a trembling hand. I felt the weight of what had just transpired for a minute as I stood in the garden, surrounded by the blossoming life I had cultivated. Then gradually, I experienced a boost. I had severed the remaining connections that held me to a traumatic past. The final what-ifs were put to rest. I surveyed the garden and the home on the other side. This was my life now, shaped by the decisions I made moving ahead rather than by regret or loss. Returning my attention to the rose bush, I grabbed my pruning shears. There was still beauty to develop, more work to be done. And I felt really very free for the first time in as long as I could remember.